Afternoon to everyone present today. Welcome to those who've joined us from around the globe. It is interesting to see how webinars have allowed a much wider audience to be able to attend events that are held in various countries. And as a chamber, we found this very, very rewarding. And I do notice in the audience, we have a large number of South Africans from our home country, which is wonderful to see that you've taken the trouble to join us. This is a jointly hosted event between the South African Chamber of Commerce and Genius Boards. I'm Sharon Constanson. I am the CEO of Genius Boards, and I'm the chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce. Genius Boards focuses on board evaluations, director training, team development, and mentoring. The South African Chamber promotes investment and trade between the two countries, between South Africa and the UK and Africa, and aims to improve the lives of South Africans. We're launching in the next few days a Walk for Solidarity, which we hope many of you will be able to support us on. Please look out for the details on the Chamber website. I will, when I've got a moment, put that into the chat line for you as well. The newly formed professional forum is a new development within the Chamber. Other forums that we've got that are active are the Young Professionals Forum, and shortly we're going to have the Women's Forum. Recently, we had a webinar for the CFCC, the Council of Foreign Chambers of Commerce, the other day, which we hosted. And we had as a speaker the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, who talked about business and businesses being able to resurrect themselves during the period ahead of us. And one of the points he made very clear is those that actually have treated their staff with empathy will have kept the right people and therefore will trade themselves out of the difficult position more successfully than other businesses are likely to do. This is probably a critical message that will be supporting some of the conversations we'll be having today. It's very, very important for companies to have good governance. Good governance gives them the ability to be agile and to be able to respond effectively to the changes in our economic and business environment. Who would have thought that you could shut down industries in a day, that you could move technology evolution forward 10 years in 3 months? The sort of things that we just never would have expected to happen. And we'll hear some stories today from those that are happening in the retail sector, those that are happening in a more industrial sector, and those that are happening in communications and in some other fairly large major critical industries in the world. Some businesses have handled this stage extremely well. Some boards have actually handled the engagement with their own, sorry, that's me that's got all the noise. That's silent now, apologies for that. And it's important to see how boards have responded in different respects. Some we've known have met as often as daily in the early days. Some of them were engaging with each other on a weekly, ultimately monthly basis. And I think the degree to which boards are as involved with the management is probably lessened quite dramatically over the last probably few weeks. A lot of companies have taken opportunities and have built new businesses, reformatted the businesses, pivoted their products and created new services, or found new customer markets, or have just seen a new opportunity totally different to what they're doing. There have also been companies that have just not making it. There are those that are taking advantage of opportunities offered by government loans. And it'll be interesting to see how, as the economic crisis deepens, how these businesses are going to build on the stages that they've been through now. I'd like to now start to introduce you to the panel. We've got Stella David, who is on the board as chairman of Clark's. She's a senior independent director of the Norwegian Cruise Lines, and she's also on the board as, I think, senior independent director or director of HomeServe, and also on the board of Bacardi's. These are all products that we in our day-to-day lives are in contact with, and Stella will be telling us stories that each one of us will be able to relate to. Ivor Gardiner, who is a consultant as a leadership consultant and works with team development with boards and in risk preparedness for businesses. And he works for Berwick's and will be sharing some stories around some particular industries he's worked with during the last few months. And then we have Alison Horrocks, who is a Group Corporate Affairs Officer for Inmarsat. Totally different industry, and if it weren't for them, we wouldn't be talking to each other in the way that we are. and she'll be sharing how a critical industry has survived through this period and how they have addressed risk in a very powerful way. So the format of the event is that we will hear a few words from each of them, positioning their knowledge and their experiences. I will then be having a conversation with them, with the panel, and then at about 22, with 20 minutes to spare, we will open up questions to the floor. And please, I ask you to put your questions into the Q&A section. We'll be picking them up from there, and I'll be posing those questions, combining them together as appropriate to the panel, and we'll be closing on the hour. So thank you very much. Please enjoy and welcome to being with us. And I would like to now take the opportunity to invite Stella David to give us a few words to begin with.
Hi, Sharon. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can hear and see me. If not, I'm sure Sharon will shout, but let's assume I'm on video. As Sharon said, do 4 boards, and prior to that I was a full-time CEO, and I have to say probably in the last 5 months I felt like I was a full-time CEO. The amount of work that's been involved with the various different problems and opportunities that are faced into following COVID-19. So of the 4 boards that I sit on, and by the way, I'm no longer the Senior Independent Director of HomeServe. I've served too long. So I used to be that, but now I am a non-independent, non-executive director because I've been there on 10 years now. But that's a technicality of governance, which makes that change. So in terms of the 4 boards that I sit on, I think we've actually spanned the full range of potential outcomes from COVID-19. And what I mean by, at one end of the spectrum, an entire industry closing down. What I mean by that is millions of people's jobs affected. And also at the other end of the spectrum, seeing the highest share price the company has ever achieved, I think yesterday. So it gives you the spectrum. So the spectrum, when you actually look at it, first of all, I sit on the board of Norwegian Cruise Lines. That is the 3rd largest cruise line business in the world, spanning luxury brands down to mainstream brands. 28 ships on the water at any one time. Each ship costs between about $1 billion to build. So you get an idea of the scale of the business. And imagine suddenly, almost overnight, when the CDC, which is the American authorities in charge of cruise lines, basically said, there'll be no more sailing. In fact, the industry shut down before they were told to, because it would have been crazy not to. But quite literally, all the major cruise lines and the minor cruise lines and anybody shut down in March. And when I say shut down, it's not simple. It's not like going to the shops and saying, I'm not going to buy something. Actually, what it means is you got thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the wrong location geographically, with ports shut down, airports shut down, immigration in chaos, and you have to repatriate both guests who are on the ships back home. You've got to repatriate crew, and repatriating crew when there are no airlines working, there are no ports open. Even today, there are still several hundred crew members who are trying to be repatriated home, and the cost of doing it is intense. Private jets, private charter of airplanes to get people home. Actually using the cruise line ships themselves as transportation vehicles. And so, the turmoil, you go from being an industry that's about bringing happiness and joy, and that's you're actually into, utter meltdown. And there is no prospect of pretty much the cruise line industry starting, I would guess, between now and the end of the year. And so that industry is raising billions and billions of dollars to shore itself up. The other end of the spectrum, HomeServe, which has, during the crisis, entered the FTSE 100. It actually also did an employee engagement survey during the shutdown, because it does it at the same date in the year, no matter what happens. And it had the most extraordinary response from its employees. Off the scale improvement. It was already very good, and now it's almost like best in class. And I think that's how you communicate with people during a crisis, and how you actually manage through and come out the other end. And then in between, Bacardi, which is a major spirits company. It owns many, many brands, not just Bacardi, Grey Goose, Bombay Sapphire, Patron, you name it. Changing the business model, going from a situation where you can know where your customers go to having no restaurants, no bars, no nightclubs, no golf clubs, no on-premise outlets of any shape or form, zero. But the consumer continues to want to have premium drinks. And so then you have a logistical supply issue, which is you're not set up to sell the amount of product that you have to sell in the routes to market that are available. But a problem to be solved as opposed to there's no market. And then Clark's, which is obviously in the retail sector, despite being a brand, it is a retail brand as well. And all your shops are shut. And during the lockdown, to begin with, the only revenue you have is online. And you would imagine that online sales go up during this situation. In fact, for the first 2 months, they went down. And the reason they went down is that why would you buy a pair of shoes during lockdown? You've got nowhere to go. You're not going to see anybody. So therefore, your sales actually go down. And so adapting to the new model and then the reopening phase, how you actually do social distancing and keep people safe and the employees safe during fitting of shoes. And right now in the UK, it's back to school season. And that is a whole different way of operating in terms of kids, protecting the kids, making people feel comfortable. So a massive array of challenges, a lot of them not foreseen. But anyway, that's kind of my 5 minutes I think I've done before we get into questions, because in a minute, Sharon's going to move me on. So I shall stop there. You're on mute, Sharon.
My mouse couldn't find it fast enough. Thank you very much, Stella. It's absolutely fascinating because most of us only see our impact on it. Ivor, you're going to give us a very different perspective from a different industry and from a different lens. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Sharon. Sharon loves to set a challenge, as those of you know who would be aware, and try and address this topic in 5 minutes is right up there with him. So I'm going to go straight to the bottom line from my perspective, which is that no organization thrives without good leadership. In a crisis, leaders must lead, not just comfortably sit in their leadership position, and there is a difference. Now, we've been through a crisis, we're still in a crisis. Nobody knows exactly where the end is or what it looks like. Many businesses have gone under, many are struggling, and the second order impacts, it's a sea of largely unknowns still at the moment. So strong and decisive leadership within that is going to be more relevant than ever. Now, I believe personally that leadership in a crisis, or rather good leadership in a crisis, looks like good leadership, full stop. For a company to fail to invest in its leadership, and that is selection, training, development, succession planning, I think is an admission of that company that they're prepared to fail. One of our clients is a global electronics firm, and last year, a fellow South African actually took over as MD of this company early last year, and he inherited a toxic leadership culture. He very quickly assessed the impact that this was having on his company's performance, and he made the decision to invest in developing his leadership. We were contracted in to run a leadership development program, and when COVID-19 hit them, and they were not unscathed, but their response was suitably robust and agile for them to weather the storm, particularly when compared to their US office. So that was the EMEA branch. And he attributes this to the time he spent developing their leaders. He had the foresight to invest in the leadership, and it's paid off for them so far. Now, my company, Berix, during COVID-19, has actively engaged with clients ranging from nuclear energy generators to a global petrochemical company, and even to a Russell Group university here in the UK. We provided direct assistance, embedding into those organizations at every level necessary to help and support them with planning, leadership, and crisis management. And this has helped ensure, in every case, an effective and sustainable response. Now, one of the clients has got 8 nuclear sites around the United Kingdom. It produces over 15% of our national grid's energy. And we've been doing crisis response work with them for over 20 years. Every year, all of their sites have to run an annual emergency response exercise. It's mandated, it's also good practice. But what COVID-19 has thrown into the mix here is a completely new dynamic, because they are used to exercising for industrial accidents and where the machinery is the point of failure. Now, suddenly we're looking at an environment where the human in the factor is the point of failure. So we were called in to provide direct crisis management support to their senior executive. In fact, we're still doing it as I speak. Now, that's addressing the leadership piece. Sharon has asked for a focus here on clarity and empathy within this. And I think the start point for this is effective communication. Clarity is essential. Being clear of purpose, getting the message out, and this includes all internal and external stakeholders. This is also about what people need to hear, not necessarily what they want to hear. And that frequently will require moral courage in the leader who has to disseminate the message. Now, in a past life in the military, we used to apply something called mission command. This is where the commander states their intent, and as long as it's clearly articulated and understood, what it does is empowers the subordinate leaders to be able to make decisions and to act. Now, we also used to say in the army that nobody likes being treated like a mushroom, that is kept in the dark and fed on BS. And that is absolutely true. People need to be kept informed. Now, the nuclear client that I'm referring to here's intent was to maintain the safe generation of nuclear power and energy for the national grid whilst protecting their people against COVID-19. And this is also where the empathy part came in. I've seen so many organizations declare values and standards and then absolutely fail to live by them. Just witnessed recently, I'm not going to mention any names, a major fashion company in the UK, which was making a lot of noise online about turning the phrase Black Lives Matter into deeds and not just words. And then it was found that one of the factories that was part of their supply chain in Leicester was actually exploiting foreign workers. So, question, was the start point for this a failure in leadership? The nuclear client established very early on a pandemic working group with one of the main focuses for them being protected personnel working on our sites from COVID-19. A high-risk category database was established and drawn up, and measures were put in place to be able to run these sites at the minimum staffing necessary for nuclear safety. In fact, some of the staff had to be protected from themselves. We all know the character in question, that person who, regardless of if they're dying of man flu, will drag their carcass across the threshold and be in work come what may. And these people had to be protected from themselves. They had to be stopped physically from coming to work. I don't mean physically, but kept at home. But importantly here is that nobody was laid off. And this showed a fundamental, the jobs were protected. It showed a fundamental empathy towards the workforce from the employers. And all stakeholders were engaged in this process, from station directors to trade union representatives, to ensure that the most robust, sensible and sustainable measures were put in place and ensure that the message was relayed clearly at every level. So here you got the empathy and the clarity. Now, we highlighted to them the impact that they may suffer if there was a death on one of the sites. They're very close-knit workforces on these sites. They all know each other. So we wargamed scenarios with the HR department. And when the first death did happen, they responded with great sensitivity. Simple gestures such as playing the deceased's favorite tune at the time of his funeral, which nobody could attend, but playing it over the internal IT system so that everybody working from home could plug in at the same time to share in a moment of farewell for a friend and a colleague. Now, these are small touches, but they have a big impact on the workforce. Also, a chief executive of a large firm here in the UK, they were very hard hit early on, and he persuaded his workforce to take a 20% pay cut. That's a hard ask. This was to protect their jobs. Now, the chief executive in question did not take a 20% pay cut. What he did was he took a 100% pay cut. He turned down his salary for the entire year, and he's turned down his dividend for the year. Now, that's moral courage. That's setting an example. And needless to say, his workforce accepted the pay cuts with very little pushback. Now, we will all have seen examples over this pandemic of the good, the bad, and the ugly. I've tried to focus primarily here on some positive examples. Crisis or not, leadership done well, it adds value where and when it counts, and it develops and builds resilience in an organization. Done poorly, it demotivates, instills anxiety and stress, and can absolutely derail an organization. So to sum up, in a crisis, there are going to be continual frictions. We don't even know what they're all going to look like yet. So leaders must lead, and they must lead with clarity. So that is what we're going to do, why and how, and that will help reduce the frictions. And the empathy, which is ensuring that the right things are done for the right reasons. So I've seen plenty of positive leadership examples firsthand over this pandemic so far, and what I've seen has worked. Thank you, Sharon.
Ivor, thanks very much. Thanks for taking up the challenge on the time as well as you did do. I'm now going to hand over to Alison, who's going to give us the story from Inmarsat's point of view and how they have been very proactively, because I've heard some of the stories on a previous webinar, as to how they've approached things from way before most of us even knew there was a problem. Alison, can I hand over to you, please?
Yes, thanks very much, Sharon, and thanks very much for the opportunity to have a session, be part of your session today, and already quite inspiring to hear what Stella and Ivor have been going through as well. So just to give you a context, Inmarsat is a global satellite communications provider. So if you imagine that you're in the middle of the desert with no communications and you're a newspaper reporter or a news media gatherer and you're trying to communicate back to the office, then you will use somebody like Inmarsat. So it's that reliability of connectivity. You're right in the middle of the ocean, you need connectivity. So Stella, I'll be coming to you to see whether Norwegian news is or not. You know, you need satellite communication. So that's what Inmarsat is, global organisation. So what I'm going to do is take you on a slightly different tack than the other speakers to you just now, and I'm going to cover our COVID journey. And picking up a little bit on what Ivor said, ours was grounded in our culture of a people-first approach to their safety and well-being. Very important on the well-being point of view. So let me start it by saying I just got out of China in time. I was actually on a business trip with my CEO to our Beijing office and seeing manufacturers and our distribution partners there. Just literally we got out about a day or so before Chinese New Year, which was when lockdown started in China. So we just squeaked out of there. And effectively then that's suddenly when it started to hit us and our thinking in the business that actually we were going to be having to face some sort of impact. And we set up a COVID risk team really by the end of January. And as well as the lockdown in China, we saw that with what was happening is that we do a lot of port installations on vessels, and the Far Eastern ports started to lock down as well. So that had also a fairly immediate impact on what we were thinking about as a business. So we set up the COVID risk team. And to start with, it was a fairly small committee. So with disciplines from security, travel, IT, facilities, HR, supply chain. Started those on a regular basis. And then once we knew how that was sort of transitioning and how actually the virus was starting to spread from Asia over into Europe, that's when we actually started to increase the regularity of meetings. So we went up to 3 times a week, and also the size of the functions that were participating as well. So we included different disciplines, so from finance, communications, PR, events, commercial, regional offices. So we were now at about 25 people in total participating in those risk meetings. I think for us, the important thing was that we weren't London-centric. We were a global business, and we needed to make sure that we respected the fact that we had those global operations. So as we were running the meetings, the regularity of the meeting schedules, the agendas, the action items were all very important. And having those fixed and formal brought a calmness about how we dealt with issues, a discipline for how we dealt with them, and a focus. We weren't distracted. We knew what we had to get through in a finite time and sort of then get on and make decisions. One of the things that we were very focused on from the off was the regularity of communications to staff, but also our partners, because for partners and staff, they needed to know that we could still operate, we could still provide those communication services, and that we had resilience of operations. So that was really important. Slightly different tone of message to staff, but very important that we relayed it across our whole stakeholder base. And for the staff, the focus was vlogs, virtual staff meetings, which interestingly, we felt actually normalized the global participation of our staff. Through emails, divisionals. Like Stella, we also had a survey, an employee engagement survey, and we also saw that the engagement went up because of how we were communicating with staff. Getting local government advice across every jurisdiction in the US, every state, really, really important. We had to know what was happening. We couldn't just rely on hearsay. So that was very important for how we were managing what we were doing, how we were responding. and we reviewed it office by office. So what we did in Singapore may be slightly different to China, maybe slightly different to Toulouse or the UK or our offices in the States. By the middle of March, everyone was working from home apart from our key workers. So those people flying the satellites and other people like that. And then we had to make sure that the office was safe for them to go into the global locations they were operating in. So the good news is we're all working from home. We're about 2,000 employees strong, and all the IT systems held up. So hooray! That's always a good news story. Staff adapted very, very quickly, and we had weekly ways of working's updates. So that focused on mental health, exercise, rest and relaxation, employee helpline. Very important facets for all communicating with the employees. Plus, of course, the regular updates from Rupert, our CEO. So we've now focused on the return to office, not to return to work because we're working, but return to the office plans. We've had them sense tested, sort of checked by an external evaluation, and they sort of said, you know, you're good to go. You've got some great sort of plans there. You know, you're an exemplar in the ones that we're reviewing. So that was really reassuring for us. We're currently still working from home at the moment, and that's regularly reviewed. We'll have to see how it goes with the second waves coming in different jurisdictions. We have to sort of just review that on a stage-by-stage basis. The risk team's still meeting. We can't just drop it. You've got to keep it going. It's now twice a week, but the executive risk team also maintains its presence. So it's business as usual, but in a slightly different way, but keeping the staff and partners engaged to help deliver what we need to do as a business. So that's me, Sharon. Thank you. You're on mute.
Mouse can't get there as fast as my mouth can. Thank you very much, Alison. That was absolutely fantastic and absolutely fascinating how global business in this nature has handled it differently to some of the other organizations we've heard from. I'd like to now just have a conversation with all of you. So I think if you could all come online, Ivor and Stella, if you could join us. And if you have background noise, keep yourself in mute. But if you don't, you're welcome to be unmuted, because we might have a bit of a conversation and join in if you feel you want to answer relative to a question I have asked one of the other panelists. So I'd like to start with you, Stella, if I may. As you've shared with us the multiple board roles that you have got and the experience across the spectrum that the different boards have had to deal with, either the way that they have responded to COVID themselves, but also due to the industry and how the industries have been impacted during this period. Considering your board within the financial services sector, which has during the lockdown elevated itself to FTSE 100, as you alluded to earlier, what specifically did this management do right to grow and to be good leaders that has got them to this place?
Oh, great question. So this is HomeServe, and I'm not going to tell you anything that's confidential. So I'm very happy to say these things. HomeServe, I think probably one of the reasons it did so well is partly due to its history. If you go back in HomeServe's history, when I first joined the board back in about 2011, now I think it was, just after I joined, it had a crisis, a major crisis, which meant that it was investigated by the Financial Conduct Authority. It had the biggest retail fine at that time that had ever been laid out, and that was because of treating customers unfairly in the UK. And it was a perfectly fine, valid fine in my view. But that was a crisis that could have taken the company under. And the company responded brilliantly. Share price was £4.50, went down to £1.30. Today it's £13.50 and as part of the FTSE 100. But that resilience experience curve still sits inside the board. There are people in the board who went through it directly, and there are people in the board who actually know what happened. And I think it gave an armory to the HomeServe board and to the management, which is, we know how to deal with the crisis. We've been here before. We don't know exactly what's coming. There are lots of known unknowns and lots of unknown unknowns, right? So I think that held very strong. I think also the company had put a lot of focus over the last few years behind people. We have a people committee. I chair the people committee, and it has the same status as the audit committee and the nominations committee, etc. It's reported in the annual report. And so there was quite a lot of framework in place that the management could use. The company was also lucky. Yeah, let's be honest. Lucky that the business didn't stop. People still need to have products that make their home safe. Their home insurance products. They need, home repairs. They need people to do jobs in their homes, and HomeServe does all of those things internationally. Biggest market being the US. So I think there's a framework there. But the key things that happen: communication and empathy. We talked about that. My other colleagues talked about that a lot. But absolutely, they're right. So the communication levels went up a gearing that you wouldn't believe. And what was interesting when the employee engagement survey was done, a lot of qualitative measures as well as quantitative, that was pulled out as being exemplary. People doing daily communications with teams, weekly communications from a sort of higher leadership group, and it was just kind of like at a level of intensity, but also a level of relevance that made it work. And the feedback was, the communication has been amazing. If only management could do it all the time, it would be brilliant. And so, interestingly enough, the feedback through COVID was a criticism of behaviour in non-COVID, in a nice way. I mean, you can criticise when you're complimenting people, but it actually said that. And there were many examples. And also, it covered everybody, not just the people in the head office or in the US or in Spain, but, a lot of people who work for HomeServe are not directly employed. They are sole traders. They're engineers who go out and do people's plumbing, or they do people's heating, or they do their drainage and things like that. And so it's a mixture of directly employed engineers and independent traders. And everybody was brought into that, understanding how you can keep people safe when they're still entering people's homes during lockdown. And if you keep people safe and everybody sees you're keeping people safe, it makes it a lot better. Also, on top of that, I think it was a feel-good factor. One, nobody was furloughed by HomeServe because business was keeping going. But also, it did quite a lot of things back to the community, and again, a feel-good factor coming through from that. And so I think they're kind of the things. But I do think there's an experience curve, which is there was, people who know what it feels like to be in a crisis. And so you're not all floundering around, going, who's going to look after this? Some of us have been there. We've got the T-shirt, and it was pretty, it was pretty horrible. So I think that kind of is my insight to that.
Stella, thanks. That was excellent. Really appreciate that. I'd like to, Ivor, turn to you for the, Alison. Next question, if I could turn to you, Alison. Given the journey that your organisation Inmarsat has been through and has travelled through, what changes did you implement, actual tactical changes that you implemented during these 5 months as the project evolved and the time elapsed? Because you have, a lot of the business we've talked about have been global businesses that we've been referring to, but yours is global in quite a dynamic, direct way because of the comms and the satellites. Can you help us with anything there?
Yeah, so sure, Sharon. So I think in the period that we've been, affected by COVID, so some of the tactical things that we did, I talked about setting up the risk team very, very quickly. And what we did fairly quickly as well is, once we knew that it wasn't going to be just localized in the Far East, we then expanded that risk team to make sure that we had the right geographic representation from our global offices. Also the frequency of meetings, because going from once a week to twice a week, then 3 times a week, keeping those meetings really focused on what did we have to do, what had changed, because things were moving hourly at some stages, and trying to keep a beat on that and keep everyone on the same page was really, really important. The Exec Subcommittee, so we have an executive management board, and 3 of us from the exec management board were co-opted to be an exec subcommittee. So being able to be really quick and decision making, and that agility to be able to respond and pull people in for decision making, and then cascading of that decisions, those were really important. So I think those are the sort of the key tactical ones that I would say sort of really bedded us down to be able to then also function as business as usual.
Quite a challenge for the environment and the global risk team, but meeting 3 times a week, that is different to what you will see in a lot of environments, but you can see the outcome of that was obviously worth the investment in the beginning. The question, Ivor, I'd like to pose to you, and this is looking at leadership as from a relation to the board of a company. What do we understand when you talked about resilience earlier? Actually, I think it was Stella who actually made direct reference to resilience. What do we understand resilience to actually mean? Given that, what does it arm the individual with to achieve better if they have it? And how would you recommend leaders build resilience?
Okay, that's a great question, Sharon, because I think, look, I have a real fear that the term resilience has become one of those easy throwaway phrases that people love to use as part of management jargon. And actually, without understanding the context, the so what and the what now behind resilience, it just becomes another meaningless term that people throw around. Oh, we're a resilient organization. And exactly what does that mean? So we apply a simple formula. To cut to the chase, really, I think resilience should be a byproduct of the way you run your business and lead your business and your organization, not something that you specifically go, oh, the effect I want to achieve is to build resilience. How are we going to do it? Resilience comes, as I say, as a byproduct. And so and I don't mean to oversimplify it. So we use a very simple equation, which has been used before in sport, but it's performance equals potential minus interferences. So it's about identifying those interferences. And a good risk management process is a part of that. Developing the potential, that's your people, your plans, and your processes. And if you can reduce and minimize potential, you reach the performance. If you're doing that, that resilience is growing as you move along that journey anyway. We think of it as a three-legged performance stool, if you like, okay? And each of the legs of that stool is people, plans, and process, because when things fall apart, it's usually associated with one of those. And, the stabilizer holding those three legs together, that's the leadership, binding it all together. And so if you've got people who are trusted and invested in, they'll feel confident, they'll feel valued, they'll have high morale, they'll likely be quite loyal to you and your organization. Then if you conduct thorough and collaborative planning so that you've got a solid business continuity plan in place, you've got contingency plans, you've foreseen some of the problems and you've addressed it. It's come back to what Stella was talking about earlier about, they were great in a crisis. Wish they were like that all of the time. Well, actually, you can prepare for a crisis. Sometimes the complicated factor is the enduring game, the long-term game and maintaining it through those long periods. And so that, that final bit there is having the processes in place coming out of your planning session and through your people, which allows for the implementation of compliance and sensible and empowering processes. So as I said, the leadership holds it together and keeps that alignment. And the sum of these parts, in my experience, is what builds that resilience into an organization, okay, rather than a deliberate, right, let's be resilient approach. That makes sense?
The interesting part is, and you did bring that across quite clearly, is resilience can be learned as a team, as an individual. And a lot of the stuff when I do lecturing on resilience is the importance of looking after yourself, your own health, your own exercise, your own well-being, your own mental health. And all of that being part of what Stella was talking about earlier as to what they did in the People Committee. The whole lot actually binds together in terms of the risk side of it. Stella, if I can come back to you, please, with another question. We're doing well on time, and we have some questions coming in from the floor, so thank you very much. We also have a comment from the floor that this is an awesome session. It must be coming from South Africa with a statement like that, but that has gone across the world. And thanking you all for sharing the valuable knowledge and experiences that you are sharing with us. So let's get on to another round of some experiences. Stella, in another circumstance, where you've got, or in this circumstance, another circumstance, your first question, where a whole industry has shut down. This is the cruise line industry, literally in a day. None of us could ever imagine that have happened. Even the week that COVID was coming into our lives, would we have expected it? And how many of us said 2020 is going to be a fantastic year? We all said this is the beginning of a brilliant decade. My goodness, has this been a surprise? How did the board, the management, and the people on the ground deal with the issues that this created? You alerted to some of the things like closed ports, ships stranded, trying to get people back to countries all over the world, and you've got staff and you've got the guests. I can imagine there were a lot of guests, particularly that weren't enamored with you, even though it was all your fault that COVID actually happened. How did you show the customer the empathy and the clarity of leadership as an organization? And how did you help them deal with what to them was probably a very terrifying, frightening experience? Equally for workers that have now got visas that have expired, they've ended up in wrong countries, hotels are closed, they've got nowhere to stay. How was that handled by management?
Well, it's a hugely complicated scenario. I mean, I think to begin with, the recognition of just how dramatic it was, there's a bit of, you know, that kind of when you have an experience you don't want to hear about, there's an initial stage of kind of like anger and denial, and then what are we going to do about it? And I think that applies in business as well. It's like disbelief. How can this be happening on this grand scale? And it was compounded by the fact, fortunately not Norwegian, but if you all remember the Diamond Princess cruise line liner that was in Japan, became the poster child for everything that's wrong. I mean, before COVID really hit, the newspapers were covered with the horror story of being stranded on a ship, not being able to get off, and pictures were going around the world. And so trying to absorb that. So the first starting point is, how can they be handling that so badly? So first of all, you're projecting into failure, and then you've got to say, okay, now we've got to handle it. And I think two or three key things is, and it didn't happen overnight, by the way. So if you think that this conclusion was reached on day 1, day 2, day 3, it was iterative, and iterative in a very fast way, real time, as Alison was saying. You've got lots of things happening almost hourly. So first of all, you go, okay, what is the real scenario? And you have to start making some bold statements like, there will be no sailings for 3 months, and then it becomes 6 months. But from a customer point of view, yes, there is the logistical problem of getting them home, and you have to spend a lot of money and just go, it doesn't matter what it costs, you've got to get them home. Yeah, and it costs a lot, a huge amount when people are all over the world as they were. The next thing to do is to say, okay, how do you protect the customer relationship with the company for a day in the future when cruises will start again? So again, iterative process, but you know, giving people guaranteed money back if you don't want to go on a cruise, but B, if you do want to go on a cruise, a thing called an FCC, which is a future cruise credit with a big discount, so you retain the ability to go. Because actually, one of the big problems is if everybody cancels their cruises and get their deposits back, you have a big negative impact on cash flow from day one. So yeah, you have to get the balance right, but put yourself in the eyes of keeping people out of harm's way. And the central message, even though it's a hard one financially, is keep the customer safe, keep the crew safe, and talk to everybody about doing that. And so that blended in over maybe 2 or 3 weeks to the point of that is the sole thing that has to happen. And there was mistakes, by the way, from everybody in the cruise line industry when people are trying to get it right. And so you could go online and see some things that Norwegian did wrong, or Royal Caribbean, everybody, because they're trying to find the solution. But the net final point of the funnel is you've got to have faith that the cruise line industry will come back. You've got to have faith that the consumer will talk favorably about you in the future. And then this is the bit that is the hard bit, which the board, the management never thought. You have to negotiate with people who are authorities in a way that was unheard of before. So, you know, thinking about safety protocols, what will happen when the virus maybe has a vaccine, what do you do in terms of the hygiene standards, huge amounts of complexity, which is completely different to what these people, you know, normally do, which is about building a business that's about happiness and joy, memories, holidays, yeah? And it's a completely different skill set. So you have to stop, and you have to go there. And so it's not been a smooth ride, but I think it's actually been hugely experiential to find the way through. And now it's actually maintaining that. And I think at the moment it's probably the hardest point for management, because there's no light at the end of the tunnel yet. There will be, there always is, because you said it earlier, Sharon. Things move forward at a pace. When economics get in the take over, and there's a crisis, you find a way through. It's not been found yet for the cruise line industry because the chinks of light a vaccine, much better outcomes for people who have it. Actually, that is starting to come through, and the treatments are making the survival rate much better. But not enough chinks of light to say there is a solution facing. And that's where management right now, I think occasionally just need somebody putting their arm around their shoulder and go, you know what, it's okay. It's okay. It's really, really tough. And actually step back and say, and you're very, very powerful executives, but you know what? It's a relentless drive with no let up in that situation. So it's not the same for everybody, but I think that's just an example of where it may be the same again for other people, because we haven't finished with this virus yet. Yeah, unfortunately.
Taking that point that Stella's just made, Ivor, looking at a industry that has gone on to a skeleton staff operation to keep a nuclear plant running, and people are working from home, you can't run something that key on a skeleton staff and on a as needed in an emergency kind of environment. You've got to bring the business back to full operation. How is the management in the organization you've been working with? How are they going to plan, and how are the people going to respond? One, personally, I'm scared I'm going to get it and die, worst case fear. To others, as you said, who would go there irrespective of what you ask them to do. How are they going to get that generation or that whole workforce back and motivated when there isn't, as Stella mentioned at the end, there isn't actually a full light at the end of the tunnel yet?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. It's a real leadership and communication challenge, because the initial message was really good. You're much like here in the UK, so stay at home, protect the NHS, that sort of thing. And then it was trying to persuade people they can come back out again. It's similar here. People have been persuaded that they need to be at home. Now, clearly, with a nuclear site, you have to maintain sub-minimal. And if you drop below that, then it impacts nuclear safety and you can't function. You have to shut down turbines. And you can imagine the impact that will have on the national grid. So it was about determining what exactly that minimum level was that they can just sustain themselves. And but people have been working from home, and a lot of people now think, oh, well, the business is still running fine. There's no problem. We can keep on working from home. It's helping them understand that that's not sustainable in the long term. To operate the plants at an optimal level, at an advanced performance level, you have to have more people on those sites. It's particularly pertinent when they have to run their outages. These things, every 2 years, a turbine has to go deep maintenance and they have to shut it down. Now, that's all budgeted for when you shut down a turbine. But for each day that an outage overruns, it's costing between £1 and £2 million per day. So to do an outage, you have to bring a lot of other people onto your site. So you're massively increasing footfall, and they're working in close proximity. It's trying to balance all of those. That's in the outage situation. But it's not dissimilar when you're working with day-to-day running of the plant. People in the engineering departments, for example, are working in quite close proximity. Those in the control, close proximity. So it's determining exactly what those levels are that you need to scale up or scale down, and getting the messaging out. But it's reassuring. So a lot of work has been done. This involves blue teaming, wargaming, red teaming of plans. I hope that isn't a whole flurry of terminology that means nothing. That's basically working up plans, challenging those plans, testing those plans. But it's also getting the messaging out to make sure that the workforce understand all of the mitigations that are being put in place to protect them. And I think that the start point of this was getting in, again, all of those stakeholders, the trade union reps, critical. External stakeholders like Public Health England and local resilience forums. It's getting that large collaborative input into all of this to make sure that those plans are properly drawn up and stress tested, and that the message gets out. So again, there's your clarity piece here. The empathy hasn't gone away. That high risk database is still being held. And people will not be penalized for being in a high risk category. Their jobs are going to be protected at this stage.
Now, good to hear.
It is good to hear. Now, of course, the business has to survive. In the longer term, how sustainable will that be if you have people who can't, physically come in and do their job? So I don't have the answer to that yet, but I do know that the organization is doing everything it can to get back to full operation again, and as much as is possible, protect its workforce and protect their jobs.
Last question I'm going to ask now, which will be of Alison, before I go to the questions from the floor, of which we have got many. As in your role of a UK listed board, Alison, where you're sort of company secretary, but your role is Chief Corporate Affairs Office, which stakeholders have lent upon you personally the most and needed support? And in what ways have they needed that personal support, that guidance, that assurance, that empathy, that clarity? What sort of stakeholder groups have they been, and how have they all differed?
Okay, thanks, Sharon. Well, you could talk for this for hours, but I will keep it brief, because I know you want to get to some of the questions as well. And I've just had a quick look on the Q&As and some really interesting ones there. So thank you very much for people for putting those on. So in Marsat now, we had a take private at the back end of 2019, the largest take private of a public company for, well, I think it was ever at that stage. So we're now in private ownership hands with 4 private equity firms. And actually, I know there's a comment actually about boards. Let me just touch on that very quickly now, Sharon, because there's a question about boards. So I think from our board point of view, we've very much made sure that our board have been updated as we've been going along. That's very important. They've understood what the plans are that we're putting in place. We briefed them quickly after the initial sort of setup of our risk committee, what we were going to do, how they were going to do it, and they've come with sort of their own knowledge and understanding. And I think what they had done is, because we were fast off the mark, is they've sort of taken that back to their own firms and to their own sort of organisations that they're representing as well. So actually, it was a very useful experience for them, and now we keep them up to date on what we're doing, how we're doing, progress, and everything else. So they've been intimately involved, along with our chairman, who's very heavily involved in understanding it. So that was just to deal with one question for you already.
Okay.
And then on so the stakeholder support. So we operate in Marsat what's called a high performance culture, so an HPC. So we sort of have pushed that throughout the whole organisation across the globe. So consistent way of talking, consistent way of managing sort of how we are in meetings, and very important for the management team is the shadow that we're casting. So making sure that when staff see us on calls, when they see us interacting on video, that they can see our engagement. And that's been very important, because actually you want to have that engagement where they see you as being engaged, they see you as participating, they see you as being normal, so asking them how they are, like you would do in the office. You start a video call and say, you do that check-in first of all. Where are you on the elevator mood? Are you sort of really high, or are you a bit lower today? So that is very important. So that covers a lot of this stakeholder engagement. With my own direct reports, it's making sure that we've got those regular interactions. And one of the things that I want to do is I want to have cameras on so that I can see what they look like. Do people look engaged? Do they look tired? Because actually the business, I think it was, as Stella was saying earlier, it's non-stop and it's back to back, because you don't have that natural informal engagement now. You've got to book a WebEx, or you've got to book a Teams call. You can't just wander down the corridor. So for me personally, I like to check in. I like to see the colour of their eyes, make sure that they actually look as though they're okay. And I think it's very important though, because if somebody's got cameras off the whole time, you can't see them. So they might, and you can put on a really great sort of voice, but you might not be feeling that great. So to me, that personal engagement, even by camera, is really important. And then more frequent divisionals. So making sure that they're shorter, they're punchier, but again, bringing everyone together regularly and cascading information. Very, very important. So, staff want to know there's a plan, they want to know what it is, and that it makes sense, and that they hear it. So those are the sort of really important stakeholder bits. So it's been from across the business, Sharon. It's not just one group. As a senior leader, you have to reach right across, regardless of scale, location, anywhere. It's, you have to lead by example.
And it's important, as you said there, is to reach all the levels of the organization, from white collar to blue collar, to those who face the customer, those that are in the back room, in the engine room of the organizations. I just want to ask Stella a question, sort of, it's embedded inside one of the questions in the that somebody has asked. You've had a recent chief executive role as well. So just looking at your various companies you're with, the way they're handling it, and your experience as a chief executive, how should and could the staff, the internal stakeholder, respond if they're not getting clarity and empathy and leadership from an organization that they're working for?
I think it's a very difficult challenge, because if they're not getting it, they don't have the toolkit to get it. It's almost a little bit of a self, if the company is well organized, it will allow those channels to work, and it will kind of get it right. So I think it's a difficult one. I think it does come from the top. If the role modeling is not right at the top, then you're going to have problems, and it's not going to go through, because in these crises, if you're not set up properly, you're not going to have the ability to find the networks through, because they haven't been provided for you. So I think it's really difficult if a company's doing that in this sort of crisis. I think they're in trouble. I think they are in trouble because the mechanisms are not going to find themselves to answer that question. So I think you've got to be set up right for it to begin with. Can I ask a slightly different question, which just because it intrigued me? There was one point in the questions that's come through, which is, isn't it interesting that the countries that have fared well in COVID are led by a woman? And first of all, I'll give you the flippant answer, and then I'll give you my real answer. My flippant answer is obviously, but my real answer is, you know what? Because they're embracing a diverse thought process. They're more likely, because they have got diversity versus the norm, inverted commas, at the top of the government. They will more likely have diversity of thought through the government, and therefore they will better be prepared for the challenges ahead. So that's not to say a woman's a better leader than a man, or a man's better leader than a woman, but I think diversity of leadership and diversity of thought is what actually makes it okay.
Ivor, I'd like to just take one of the questions here that has been asked of you, as somebody who listened to your presentation at the House of Lords earlier this year for our dinner. Apart from a leader being an example to his team and ensuring good communication, honesty, direction, ethics, governance, etc., what does a leader need to do to ensure he or she creates an energized team that ensures sustainable business and meets stakeholder expectations? Now, there's a lot in there. We don't have a lot of time, and I'm going to have to put the rest of the questions to the rest of you offline at some point in time. So Ivor, would you like to make that your closing comment? And I do apologize to the rest of you. We have run out of time, and there's some very good questions missing.
And look, I apologize. I've just seen there are two questions specifically directed there, and I haven't been reading the questions because my multitasking is appalling. I can't sit and listen and read questions and respond. So I'm very happy.
You weren't meant to, don't worry.
To take any conversations offline if people want to pursue any of those questions.
We'll do that.
That one, there's so much to that one, and it's going to be very difficult for me to sum it up. But I think, good leadership is about getting to know your people. It's spending time with your people. It's investing time in them and effort in them, getting to know them, their problems, their aspirations, and as I said, investing in them. You need to be collaborative with the people who work for you. You need to make them feel that they're involved in the decision-making process, in the deliveries and the outputs. You need a specific type of focus. You need that clearly stated intent that I spoke about earlier. You need, I think, have a selfless approach, an inspirational approach. You need to be inclusive. That's a collaborative bit, and a transformational attitude. And I know those are all just platitudes. Easily
said, but
it's how you live those. It's how you live and breathe those things while you are leading your organization at whatever level. And
authentic.
It's a great one. We had a guy talk to us, a Norwegian fella, on just that type, authenticity in leadership. That honesty. And I think if you get it right, if you get all those things right, you will build a culture of cooperation, confidence, capability, and trust. And ultimately, you will build in that resilience into your organization. I'd love to elaborate more, but
I know we'd love to. I think we're going to have to come back and address all these again. But I do know Alison has to drop off this line now. Do you want to just give your last little nugget, and if you have to drop off, we excuse you if you don't make it to the last half a minute that we're going to be here.
That's fine, Sharon. I'll give my nugget, and I'll stay on if it's another couple of minutes. So that's fine. So my nugget would be act quickly. You can always disband. So bring something together quickly. You can always stop it. But at least if you've acted quickly, that's great. And now is the time to test your crisis management policies against the reality of what's happened as an incident and adapt them. And my final bit would be, remember to communicate regularly with your staff because they are our most valuable asset. That's me.
Thank you. Stella.
Unmute. I won't repeat what's been said, but I think the one for me that's kind of, I think we've just got to be prepared for the unexpected. I think there are more twists to come in this, and I don't know what they are. But I think be prepared for those, because I think that is the way to be stronger.
Thank you. Ivor.
Yeah, sorry, Sharon. I thought that was my summing up in the last one, but it's
You've got a nugget left.
it basically just comes down to lead. If you're a leader, a good leader leads. It's not enough to be in a position of leadership and go and take the privilege that comes with it. You need to actually be seen to be doing the job. And it's a tough one at times, particularly in a crisis. You can't afford to shy away from the hard stuff. But invest your time in your people, get out there and lead.
Thank you very much. And to all of you, this has been an amazing session. We could go on another hour, and I think most of the people would stay on. And I thank most of the people who have stayed on with us. Thank you very much. Really appreciate everything you've done, and those who are supporting the Chamber, thank you very much for your support and ongoing effort, and do the solidarity walk with us. I'll put the thing in the chat line in half a second if you don't mind. And then to the panelists, thank you guys. That was awesome, as said by one of our guests. Really interesting and very, very successful ability to transfer your knowledge and your experiences in a way that's been so meaningful to other people. I'm sure somebody out there, or everybody out there, hopefully, is taking something back to their desk, whether it be at home or in the office. And we've learned from the experience of spending an hour with us today. So thanks to all of you, and from Genius Boards and those guests who came specifically as Genius Boards customers, thank you for your support and engagement over the years that we have shared time together, and in the future too. So to good governance and to good risk management and to taking actions immediately. Thanks, team. I'd like to thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.